Beth Shelburne, R.D. Song. This is the News at 9. Now, tonight's cover story on NECN.
From 1777 to 1791, before it became the 14th state, Vermont was its own republic. Now, more than 2 centuries later, there's a push to return to Vermont its original independent status. May sound extreme, but it's a movement that is in fact gaining some traction. NECN's Anya Haneke has our cover story.
Thomas Naylor has been saying the same thing for more than a decade. At first, he jokes he was preaching to an audience of one. Now he says there are many more willing to listen.
There is an increasing, gradual awareness that we're in deep trouble.
Naylor, a former economics professor at Duke who lives in Charlotte, Vermont, can rattle off a list of what he says are the U.S.'s biggest problems: peak oil, global warming, terrorism, the economy, and the nation's healthcare system. Also of major concern, he says,
that the U.S. government has lost its moral authority, that the government is owned, operated, and controlled by corporate America.
The time has come, Naylor says, to take action. What he proposes, though, he admits, is pretty radical. He wants Vermont, population 620,000, to be its own country.
We always define it as really a radical act of rebellion that's driven by anger and fear.
Naylor helped found a network and think tank in 2003 called the Second Vermont Republic. The group is pushing for the secession of Vermont from the U.S.
That it's classic David and Goliath. I mean, what could be more absurd than tiny Vermont trying to stand up to the greatest economic military empire of all time? I mean, that's really pretty ridiculous. But therein lies the energy, therein lies the power.
The movement has remained relatively quiet for the past few years, offering an occasional newsletter or speech. But in the past couple of months, something has changed. It started with a survey conducted by the University of Vermont, which found that in 1 year, the number of people who supported secession rose from 8 to 13%. That was followed by local, national, and international media coverage, which is encouraging, Naylor says, but he believes the majority of Vermonters won't be sold on secession until something major happens.
It's going to take peak oil, not $3 per gallon for gasoline, but $5, $6 and higher, a potential crash of the dollar, more effects of global warming, collapse of the healthcare. It's these external factors that are going to drive Vermonters to rethink.
Some may snicker at the idea of Vermont as its own country, but the secession movement has established a presence here. There's a secession newspaper, Vermont Commons, and there are secession bumper stickers and T-shirts, which at this store have been recently selling like hotcakes.
We've sold a ton of them.
At Riverwalk Records in Montpelier, owner Jacob Grossi is making a profit. At the same time, he's making a statement.
For us, it's a big states' rights issue, and I think that it's just an important issue to have on the table.
The movement, he says, does have people talking, some who support it.
I'm not really proud to be an American for the way that we treat people in other countries.
And many others who oppose it.
I think Vermont would lose an awful lot if we weren't integrated with the markets and the economy of the United States.
Vermont Governor Jim Douglas is among those who don't believe secession should or will happen.
I really don't take the movement seriously. Vermonters do have a right to be annoyed with what's going on in Washington, D.C., but I don't think the answer is secession.
President Douglas, that has a ring to it.
No, I don't think that's enough to persuade me.
Douglas doesn't expect secession to become a real possibility.
$9.75.
But there are some, including Phil Young, who say not so fast.
I think we got to do it so we're ready when things do collapse. Because I believe they will.
A fifth-generation Vermonter and a country store owner, Young espouses the notion that smaller is better.
Just a regular guy who thinks it's better than the current system.
Figuring out exactly how secession would play out, though, is a task for another day. Thomas Naylor says the first step is a statewide convention. If it passed there, it would move on to Washington.
It's quite likely that the U.S. government will say no, but the real question is, what, if anything, will they attempt to do about it?
Ultimately, Naylor can envision the U.S. being divided into 20 different countries, with Vermont joined with New Hampshire, Maine, and a small portion of Canada.
And create a little country the size of Denmark that we might call New Acadia.
It sounds a bit crazy, he admits, but he believes it will happen. He notes there are separatist movements in more than half of U.S. states.
How many times have you heard people say you're nuts?
Well, a few times, but with less frequency than in the past.
And for now, that is all the encouragement he needs. In Charlotte, Vermont, Anya Haneke, NECN.
Naylor also says Vermont is in a perfect position to be the first to secede as a small, non-threatening state with no major strategic resources.
And he says living in Vermont in many ways is already like living in a small European country.